Hello everybody. In the previous video we talked about config. So in the config we are talking how to map the key value pairs using so that application or pod can read that from the environmental variable, and at the same time we can mount it in the volumes and we can read the configuration. Similar fashion, we are going to use secret. The word secret implies that you want to keep any confidential information into the pod. You can use it secret. Secrets provides a way in Kubernetes to distribute credentials, keys, passwords, or secret data to the pod. Kubernetes itself uses the secret mechanism to provide the credentials to access the internal API. So secret is one way to provide secret native to Kubernetes. Secrets can be used in the environmental variables or the file in the pod or volumes, or can be mounted into the pod, and then you can specify it. So you can add it to the Redis configuration. And if you have a MySQL database, and for example I have a MySQL database, I'm just adding the username and password. I'm just converting into base 64. I'm adding into my Kubernetes using secret values, and then when I launch a pod I can refer the value and launch it. So whenever when I launch each time the pod, I can keep the confidential information centralized location, and the pod, in case pod goes down or something, I can still retrieve it. Then pod can able to talk into the container. Pod can able to get the information and launch it. So let's have the demo so you can have a clear understanding on it. So this is a sample thing. So my first sample thing is that is like I'm going to launch a pod. So I have the username and password. I have hard coded it and store it in the Kubernetes. So once I store it in the Kubernetes, I'm going to launch a container. In the container, I'm going to store it in this mount path with user ID and password. So the application can take it and utilize it. So let me launch it. So yeah, so it has launched my secret, and I'm going to use launch the pod now. So it's referring to my secret. So yep, so let's launch it. So let's see, pod is up and running. So yep, so pod is up and running. Pods up and running. Yeah, so we have the username and password. Now let's check the username and password. Here is a year of the users. In this way, you can use it for the Kubernetes to take the user credential and password. And now we'll have another demo, which is similar fashion. We have hard coded with the higher values, and then we are launching the pod. When we launch the pod, we can see the value here. And the third thing, now I have a web server. I want to pass the user information. Like let's create a user ID and password. Okay, similar fashion, you can use it for databases as well. So cd secrets. So what I'm going to do is that is I'm going to touch two file user ID and password file. Yeah, so that's already exists. kubectl delete. I'm storing it in the same information. So delete secret. Okay, my secret. So let me delete kubectl delete -f. Now let's create it. So the pod is getting terminated. I should have stored it in a different name. Sorry, it's my mistake. Yep. So now let's launch the pod. Let's see. Okay, it's created. So let's get pods, and the secret test is ready. Now let's get into the pod. Okay, so where we have stored it in temp, we have stored it in the temp mysec password username. So this in this way we can store the username and password for secrets. Now let's talk about other topic. The other topic is health check. So health check is basically if your application has a malfunction, so the pod and the containers can be still running, but applications might not be working anymore. So to detect and solve this kind of problems, so there is an option called health check. So health check normally uses we differently call it as liveliness. They are normally done using two different types, running using command or using a health check using URL. So you can do periodically checks on the URL, and you can test the pod internally how it is really they're doing well or not. So let's have the demo for that. Typically, health check and liveliness is nothing but if you have pod and you have some service running inside it, you need to ensure that pod keeps running internally with with that port, or you can use it with the health check, some health checks if you want to perform. So Kubernetes have taken care of that as well. Let's see the demo. So in this demo, I'm having an liveliness. This is using the periodically we using the typical command line health check. So in the command line health check, what I'm doing is that is I'm having a file, health file. I'll always keeping it up, and in this health file, what I'm going to do is that is I will drop so in say 600 seconds is basically say make it 200. So 200 is almost how many minutes? So what will happen is it keep it up and it will try to launch the pod. When we launch the pod, within 10 seconds, within 10 seconds, it will delete this file. So meanwhile, this pod will be unhealthy and will be back normal once it keeps back the page. So what we are doing is that is we are doing liveliness. So in similar fashion, we are doing HTTP check. On the HTTP check, it will check on the port 80. So in case the ports are 8080 port 8080, in case if you have problem, immediately it will try to give us a error like saying that it has got some problems, a crash back. And when we check the logs, we will come to know this pod is giving the problem. So let's launch it. So the pod is launched for executive. This is command line, and next is a TCP based, that is HTTP based. So kubectl get pods. Yeah, the pods are running. Now in soon after, in few minutes, the pod will get crashing back. Let me pause it for a while. Once the pod is crashed, I will resume it. Yeah, so what has happened right now is you can see the pod has got crashed. So in this thing, you can see the HTTP, and you can see that it's got crashed because health check was failing. So if you see the logs, you can clearly see that it is trying to call, but it continuously do the health check because since it is not running successfully, it got failure and it has failed back. And the similar fashion, you can also see the execute. So it is can't open the temp file. It is trying to see the check, and continuously success was 1 and failure was 3. So in this way, we can make ensure that the pod is really run successfully, and you can do your health check internally on the container and how the pod really behaves, how your port is behaving. So in this way, it's really helpful. So Kubernetes also help to solve this kind of problem. Thank you guys. In the next video, we'll talk about jobs and cron job.